fictional friends, and welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Megan.
And I'm Shireen.
And it's the last week over here of our high fantasy coverage for the month of June.
Sad.
Shireen's sad. It's fine. To wrap things up this month, we figured we'd take a look at, arguably the gateway to all things high fantasy, which was Tolkien and his work with, Middle Earth, Lord of the Rings, everything to do with that, the characters that he created, the sort of themes that are recurring, and how that's kind of really laid the groundwork for most things to come afterward. I would say it's pretty rare that you see something that you can't kind of trace back to Tolkien in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it's just really interesting because we were trying to plan our month of episodes.
Yeah.
And it's you can't talk about high fantasy without talking about, at first we were the Lord of the Rings.
In general, yeah.
But then we were well, hang on a second. There's more to Tolkien than the Lord of the Rings.
Yes,
He created one of the most elaborate
expansive universes probably that exists. Yeah.
I think even to this day.
Probably, yeah.
And so, you can't... So we had to take a step back and be I think we need to do more. Also, we cannot do one episode on all the Lord of the Rings. We would be here all night.
It would be a 5-hour episode, so we would have had... And, and I think that, people have talked about the films so much already that, maybe we'll get to them at some point and break them down a little bit, one at a time, because you would have no choice but to do that. But I just find, it's kind of also interesting to sort of, pull back the curtain a little bit and then take a look at, the work itself that came before the kind of, explosion with regards to, an epic film franchise that was created about this as well. So I think it lends itself a little bit better to everything that we've been talking about this month to probably go back to the beginning in a way.
Yeah.
To talk about it.
This.
Not that the roots, not that fantasy didn't exist prior to Tolkien. It did.
No, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, it's been around for a long time, but just to dig into, arguably the most well-known, popular, and respected modern quote. Yeah, technically, yes. Writers and universes created in the genre.
Totally.
Yeah. Before we get started, though, Shireen, what's on your nightstand this week?
Well, I guess it would be on my nightstand. I guess you could say it's in my AirPods.
It's in your ear holes.
in my ear holes. So since Spotify Premium added audiobooks, I've been it's been great because now I can read a book, and then when I'm trying to fall asleep, I can listen to a book.
Yeah.
So so I've started reading or listening to Twisted Love by Anna Huang.
Yeah.
Good God, the smut.
Is it? Okay, so this is something, I don't really wind up doing this very often. Yes, so I've listened to, A Court of Thorns and Roses and stuff, that audio.
The dramatized version.
Those are fun.
They have, a full cast.
Yeah. But I've not done anything audiobook-wise with, super smutty romance.
Yeah.
And I do feel it would be a little bit weird. I did listen to one Bridgerton book via, I think the first one.
Right.
Because I was I don't feel like reading it. So I had had the audiobook and I downloaded it and I just listened to it. And yeah, there are sex scenes in it and stuff like that. But it was also written a little while ago. We weren't quite into the smuttiness of the smut that you get now in romance. Yeah. So you got some, but it wasn't that... It was not that explicit or that frequent even in the grand scheme of things. Whereas I find now, so I've never read any of the Twisted Love books, but I know that they are ridiculously popular on BookTok.
They really are. And you see them everywhere. And I was well, it's on Spotify. I might as well just give it a listen. I think the thing that's throwing me off a wee bit is that they keep, because it's not a dramatized version, they've got
one narrator.
Well, they've actually done it so that they have two, because my understanding is that it's written from both their point of views.
It's a dual POV. That happens a lot in romance.
Yeah. And so when it's her, it's a woman speaking. When it's him, it's a guy.
Okay.
But it's funny because when the girl is speaking and he's responding to her, she does a deep voice. Oh my God, that's funny. And so it's just really funny because he sounds like a real miserable piece of shit when she speaks for him. It's I don't like this kind of thing.
Oh my God.
Would you like to come in? It's am I supposed to be turned on by this?
It's every girl imitating her boyfriend
exactly.
ever.
It's when you're imitating your boyfriend and you're duh, I'm a stupid boy. But when it's from his point of view, I think it's supposed to be a little 50 Shades of Grey-esque because he's all I don't go for these girls. because I like to fuck in a specific way.
Oh,
and you're like, oh, okay, we're going down this road.
They use those lines. That's like a copy paste.
Oh, yeah. And like, he's like, I have like my like, what does he call it? He's got like a list of women that he calls upon because they accept him for the way he likes to fuck. And I'm just like,
Jesus, it's just
interesting.
It's just a little black book. Just call it that.
Well, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
Like, and so anyway, so I'm not that far in, but I'm like, I'm going to keep reading or listening because this is just funny more than anything.
Oh my God.
And I can only imagine when it starts getting really explicit, instead of being like, ooh, it's going to be like tea.
Yeah. It's so different. I find like reading really explicit scenes, it doesn't really like feel the same way. I feel like listening to them, you're going to be like, whoop.
Yeah, it's like, are my headphones low enough?
Just like glancing around like that little meme of that little monkey that's just like side-eyeing everybody around them. Like, what?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Anywho, what about you, Megan?
I think I'd come across this as like a suggestion or something. So I was looking at like, some different sort of cozy kind of fantasy reads and stuff like that, and I came across it and it was on Kindle Unlimited, so I was like, yes. So I'm right. I'm maybe like a third of the way into a book called Between by L.L. Starling, more of like an indie fantasy that was published a few years ago. It's really fun so far anyway. It's about this young woman. Her name is Sasha. She's working as like a substitute teacher, and she gets a alleged temporary position in a very small town called Old Middleton. Wow. And she moves there for a period of time with her best friend, who's like working on her thesis basically, so she's not like having to be
always an
anywhere.
English major.
Yeah. No, it's psychology, I think, actually. Yeah. So they've moved there for a period of time, and she quickly discovers that basically Old Middleton pretty much sits on a portal to something that they call Otherworld, and then there's a universe that exists between Otherworld and Old Middleton called Between, which is like where the forces try to sort of fight one another. And she sort of accesses it through dreams to begin with, and unfortunately finds herself kind of accidentally performing a task in between that tethers her to the sorcerer who's just taken over the other world, who he's become the king through, again, like a magical tethering of sorts that he doesn't necessarily want it that badly, but he's sort of stuck with it now. Okay. And so she's been tethered to him, and apparently her completing this task means they're supposed to be married, and she's like, what the fuck?
She's like, I was just sleeping.
Yeah. And so it starts to become like a whole thing where there are like a ton of like witches or people with magical powers in the town, and a lot of people don't know about it, but a lot of people do. And so there's this whole group of old ladies who are like helping her so far try to figure out how to navigate this, because they've just realized what she's accomplished, and they're like, oh fuck.
Well, at least people are coming towards her. Like, I assume there's going to be some sort of conflict where someone wants to kill her.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. There's going to be some stuff, I'm sure, because I'm sure that someone was, I guess we're not clear right now as to whether the old king of the other world was killed by the new one, or he was just ousted by him and took off running. I think that's what they're saying, is that he's taken off.
Right.
But no one has explained why yet. So it's like sort of waiting, like, does that mean he'll try to come back and kill the current one? Anyway, it's supposed to be one of these like very cozy, very slow burn romance between the two of them. It was giving me, because it's funny, like a lot of like the dialogue and like the little things are funny, it was giving me very, if you guys have read Assistant to the Villain, it gave a little bit of that kind of banter between the two of them almost, which I think I put Between as a recommendation on a list that I wrote for the site recently of upcoming fantasy books that are being released for the rest of 2024, because the follow-up novel to Assistant to the Villain, Apprentice to the Villain, is being released in August of this year, if I'm not mistaken.
I gotta add these to my list.
Yeah, they're really fun, and that was a big book talk one when it came out. That was a big book talk one when it came out, Assistant to the Villain. So the follow-up's being released this summer, and Between is I believe a suggestion that I had put for people if you're looking for something else kind of thing. Like, if you enjoyed it, this would be like a good read. So yeah, so go check that list out.
It's not included in premium.
Oh, okay.
But Fourth Wing is now.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, hey, go check out the website, guys. We have a ton of wonderful contributors who are constantly writing all kinds of great content and recommendations and deep dives into things, and it's really great. So you should go check out fullybooked.ca and just, take a look at that if you're looking for your next read. But yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. I'm having fun with it so far. It's very long. It's like over 900 pages, so
holy cheese
it's going
balls.
to take a minute and a half to get through, so...
I'm trying to say I don't see Between on here either.
It might not be. It's a little bit more of an indie release, that one.
It's not Between Ink and Shadows.
No.
Okie dokie.
Yeah.
We'll add it to the list.
But anyway, if anybody's interested, it's called Between, and the author's name is L.L. Starling. So just keep that in mind, everybody. Yeah, okay, so... we've been dawdling, but let's...
we have a lot to cover, and I think we just don't know how to dive into
it in the first place. Yeah. I mean, look, like, to be fair, I know enough, but I defer to you for a lot of Tolkien knowledge because you have studied certain aspects of things and taken it, like, much further with regards to, like, knowledge and fandom than I have in that way, where, like, I kind of enjoy things, but a little bit more, like, from a bit more of, like, a removed perspective.
You're like, yeah, this is fun.
It's good.
While it's there.
I like it.
And I'm like, I must know the lore.
Yeah. But I do think that, especially, I mean, it's probably been nice to have, the films, both like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and everything like that, and even Rings of Power now, having been created in a more modern space, because we do see how the characters, like so many types of characters that were established, are kind of like, at least to a certain degree, recurring in a lot of more modern fantasy, particularly, obviously, high fantasy.
Yeah, and you do see them, like, and what's really interesting about Tolkien, like, the difference between watching the movies and reading the books. Yeah. Like, you're going to get a very different tone, first of all.
Yeah.
Because you have to remember that Tolkien wrote these in the 20s.
And they were published, Hobbit was published in 1937, I believe. And
mean, The Hobbit was written for children.
Yes.
So, The Hobbit is a standalone book. Yeah. If you didn't know this, if you haven't read it.
Yeah.
It's a standalone book, and when they made it into movies, they really stretched it out into a much bigger battle, a much bigger story. Mm-hmm. They brought back the orcs, and all of the bad guys, basically, from The Lord of the Rings. I get why they did that from a cinematic perspective. As somebody who loves Tolkien and who's read a lot of it, I don't hate it. Like, I thought it was great entertainment value. A lot of people hated it. I believe, and don't quote me on this, I believe Christopher Tolkien, his son,
was not happy
to the point where he is no longer giving up any of the rights for filming. And so, I think it really depends, like, on why you're watching this. I get that there's a lot of very hardcore fans. We were just kind of looking and browsing. There are, people write their thesis on Tolkien. It's been very widely studied.
Yes.
Like Megan mentioned, I personally took a course at university on Tolkien, and it was based on the language. If you've ever heard of Beowulf, Beowulf was like a kind of a...
It's an epic poem.
It's an epic poem, and it was written in Old English.
Yes.
So it's like Germanic English.
Yeah, and it's about, that's a warrior named Beowulf who has to fight a monster named Grendel.
Grendel.
Right?
Well, Grendel and his mother.
Oh, right.
And there's a dragon, a Draka in Beowulf. So if you compare Beowulf to The Hobbit, and you take the language that Beowulf was written in, Old English, it's very reminiscent of Tolkien's Elvish. And so there was a lot of synergies. He pulled from that story a lot when he wrote The Hobbit. Your Draka is basically Smaug.
Yeah.
He sits on a hoard of treasure, like same as Smaug. So, like, Tolkien pulled a lot from history to write, some of his stories. In addition to that, when we're talking about recurring characters that, Tolkien either created or wrote about, one story that's not widely spoken about that I really like that Tolkien wrote is Beren and Lúthien, which was based on Troilus and Cressade.
Oh, right, yes.
But also based on, Tristan and Isolde. And then turned into, like Romeo and Juliet and like those kind of characters. So, like, throughout Tolkien's universe, he's got like a lot of historical figures, but then he's created this whole universe that goes around it. And then you start seeing like your mystical figures, like Megan's mentioning, that keep recurring through a lot of stories. Your goblins, like orcs are something that I think stay a lot within the Tolkien universe.
I guess because of like their name and stuff and how they would be so closely associated with it, I don't think a lot of people touch them because they just feel like they live so wholly within that Middle Earth universe that exists, that I feel like it would be weird for them to try. I feel like people have felt like if they tried to take those, everyone would be like, no, now I'm just in the Lord of the Rings
Now
book.
I'm in the Lord of the Rings. Same with the other guys. I think they're the Uruk-hai or something.
The Uruk-hai, yeah.
Uruk-hai. Same thing, very Tolkien-esque. But again, he pulled these from somewhere. Like, he didn't invent a lot of these characters. But then when you start looking at, the elves, the goblins, the... oh my God, the word is not coming to me. Not the gnomes. The
hobbits? What are we talking about?
No, Gimli.
Oh, the dwarves.
The dwarves, yes. Thank you. Yeah, the dwarves, which, the Hobbit is mostly based on dwarves and hobbits.
Yeah.
You pull all these, even the Ents, so the trees who speak in the second one, the Two Towers, the tree herders, they're known as. All of these characters, they are very much recurring.
Yeah.
But what I love about a lot of Tolkien's characters, especially the elves, is that you've got really strong female characters.
Yes. But you get that with the women a little bit, like the human women, I should say.
The human women
as well, but
even the Hobbit women, like they kind of like they're the ones in charge.
They are. It's true. They do have that, but that's it. But it's nice that as the stories sort of expand, you do get a lot of that as well. Well, I could be insane, but from what I remember having kind of come across a few facts here and there at one point, if I'm not mistaken, the character of Arwen was inspired by Tolkien's wife.
I think so. I think that's correct.
When he created that character.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. He very much had a lot of respect for women in his stories.
Yeah.
Now I know that you could argue if you look at the Fellowship of the Ring, they're all men.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess the thing with Tolkien is that, did he stick to a lot of societal norms at the time that he wrote the books? Yeah, probably. Of course he did. However, he was willing to, I don't remember there being anything in Tolkien's workings that made me feel that there was a disrespect towards women specifically.
Or you can't be involved in the battle because you're a woman.
They do it a little bit with Eowyn, but then
they do.
She circumvents all expectations anyway, and she does everything. She kills him.
Of course. But they do the same, they impose the same view on, the hobbits as well,
yes,
right?
They do, yeah.
They're oh, you're too small. You can't come and fight.
And
that's kind of what the story is also about, is that, if you have a strong heart and you're brave, it doesn't matter, how big you are, how small you are.
Your gender, whatever
whatever. You can make a difference in the world, So it's very sweet in that way.
It is nice. It's true. It is kind of nice in that way. But yeah, I do think that I do appreciate that, at a time when I'm sure that a lot of the stories were being written were all about male heroes and stuff. Tolkien took a human female character in the middle of a bunch of mystical creatures all over the place and was oh no, she's the one who kills the big bad at the end.
Yeah.
And actually her gender empowers her to be able to do that.
Yeah. Exactly.
As opposed to stripping it away.
Yes. especially in the movie, they make such a great, point of that.
Oh, it's so good.
I am no man.
Yeah.
And you're ha ha. Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah, that's it. And Miranda Otto does that so incredibly well. That whole scene is great.
But there's also, Galadriel, who's a big, powerful figure. The reason why she cannot be part of the Fellowship of the Ring, and she says it herself, is that the ring holds too much
ability to corrupt, basically.
Right, and she is corruptible by it. She knows this. She was one of the Elven kings, quote, who was given a ring of power.
And we're going to see that if you guys have watched Rings of Power. That's that's where that whole thing is headed. And in Rings of Power, that is something that they make pretty clear from the beginning. Galadriel's a bad bitch.
Oh yeah, she's very powerful, but she kind of falls into the trap of the rings.
She does, yeah, exactly. Which and that's it. It sort of it also, I think that was created to show that no one is infallible.
No,
everyone is corruptible, be they human or elf or anything else, really.
Well, that's where you get this Gandalf. So Gandalf refuses to touch the ring
because he also does not want it to.
And, you know, he even says to Frodo, I would try to do good, but I would do bad. And then if you think about Dumbledore as a character, fast forward, very same character, his whole storyline with Grindelwald.
Yes.
You know, he wanted to do
I would try to do good
for the greater good, but he realized they were doing bad things. And so he could never become Minister for Magic, even though they offered it to him many times.
Like, no, I won't do that.
He refused. So, you know, these types of characters, they come back in like these very big stories that we love.
Yes.
And we love these characters because we love a character who's able to identify their own shortcomings.
Yes, yeah, it's true. Someone who's able to take that step back and be like, nope,
not for me.
That would be a bad idea.
It'd be bad for everybody.
I think that would be really bad.
My intentions would be good,
but the things would be bad. And so we appreciate that you're very powerful characters like Gandalf, like Galadriel, like all of these people who are like, no, no.
Yeah.
And also knowing themselves, I think, as well, like being aware of their own power to know that in my hands, this would be horrible.
Right. And, you know, and then like on the flip side, you get the characters who don't know their own shortcomings. So you've got like the he's not even the king of Gondor. He's the what is he?
The steward.
The steward.
The steward of Gondor?
The steward of Gondor, who is so blind by his like power and like grief for his son Boromir that he almost kills Faramir.
Yeah, and lets himself again be corrupted.
Yeah,
I know it doesn't last. I get that. Like they kill the whatever the fuck his name is. They're the little weaselly one, but
there's always a weaselly one. Even for the King of Rohan, he's got his little Weasley one whispering in his ear.
The King of Rohan has one, fucking Wormtail. Like, they all come back. They all come back.
Yeah,
they all come back.
Because it's a great way of, like, moving the story along, right? Like, how else would you corrupt the King of Rohan? Yeah. Like, somebody who is so, just so kingly. Like, you know, like, he's, like, the epitome of a king.
Someone who's very righteous and everything. How would you do that? It would be by inserting, like, the opposite of that, but a little shadowy, snaky one. Who am I thinking of from Game of Thrones right now? Shireen, help me. Fucking what's his name there?
Who are you thinking of? Give me the king character.
With Sansa.
Littlefinger.
Thank you. There's always a Weasley one.
Yeah, there's always a Weasley one with ulterior motives. And like what's interesting about all these characters that we're naming here is that they're evil for the sake of being evil. Like they haven't been like controlled by the bad guy.
No,
they're literally on the side of the bad guy.
Yes, yeah,
which makes them that much more dangerous.
Because that it takes away, like, it was, I guess, Tolkien doing something different from what had been seen previously in literature. And I'm gonna like veer off of like total fantasy here and think of something like Dracula. Like Renfield is corrupted by Dracula, and I mean, like, does he allow himself to be kind of, but also really not? Like in the original story, not really. He's a solicitor, and he arrives at the castle in order to help sort out certain affairs and is mesmerized and bitten by Count Dracula and then becomes his lackey.
Right.
You know? And
but so that's not the
it's
same.
all control that's being exerted, and that's something that you see over and over again. And in like older literature, you see that over and over again, someone being controlled, and that still happens now also.
Of course.
But Tolkien kind of tried to take that to a different level and be like, but what if someone actually wanted to be doing this stuff?
What if they were actually evil and then the bad guy was able to then use them as like, oh, hey, this is perfect, you know? I'll like station you in the best possible place to be my eyes and ears.
Exactly.
And they do that, right? Yep. Like, and we still see it. Like Wormtail is a perfect example of this.
He's a pretty great one. He's a pretty great, like, almost stock character to a degree.
And like him, he doesn't have a redemption arc. It's actually the magic that Voldemort bestows on him to give him a new hand.
Yes.
When he hesitates, because Harry says, like, I saved your life.
Yeah.
Because he hesitates, Voldemort kills him himself.
Yep.
Because it's like, you have to be fully, like...
He's like, oh,
you basically have to be fully evil.
Yeah,
otherwise,
you have to be a full piece of shit, and you're only 90% of the way there.
Yeah, exactly. Like, now, even if you hesitate for a second, like, it's going to cost you your life, you know?
It's true. And then, okay, so building on what you were talking about, right? When we're talking about, like, strong female characters, and particularly the idea, I think, within that of a strong female character who everybody thinks is unremarkable and she herself thinks is unremarkable. So if you take, like, Eowyn, and then you push that forward to Feyre from A Court of Thorns and Roses, push that forward to, what's her name, Violet from Fourth Wing, like people who think that they're unremarkable.
But they are from a lineage of remarkable people.
True, yeah.
I mean, maybe not Feyre so much, but like...
No, that's true. I guess Feyre doesn't have that, so she's kind of an interesting character for that reason, I suppose.
But like Éowyn and Violet from Fourth Wing, spoilers, sorry if you haven't read Fourth Wing, get on that.
I mean, I haven't, but I kind of know the gist of
things. You know, they're both from like their ancestors or their families are. Yeah. So like Éowyn is related to the King of Rohan. Yes. I think she's his niece.
Yes.
Yeah. And like Violet, her mother, and like her whole family are like these big like fighters and stuff, you know? And so they have to live up to this expectation, but the whole time they're like, I'm not like that. That's not me.
Yeah.
But Éowyn on her side is like, I want to be like this. Yes. Let me be like this. Let me fight.
And it's everyone else who's being like, no.
We need to protect you. Yeah. Like, again, we're quoting the movie mostly with Éowyn. I think in my head she didn't have that much of a presence in the books, but I'm not sure. I can't recall at this point, so I'll just add that as a caveat. But I did like that they put a lot of spotlight on her in the movies because I thought she was a really great character.
Yeah.
And it's also another way of like, you know, having that representation to get more people to want to watch these movies.
And having this representation of like some female empowerment within these stories that, like you're saying, you know, are largely male focused in the sense that the majority of the characters that we're focused on throughout the course of all of the films and all of the books are male.
Yeah.
So it's nice to have like those added like those added bits here and there, and maybe like put a bit more of a spotlight on someone who maybe initially in the source material didn't receive that kind of spotlight. And what does that do? Like that empowers women. And like, I'm sorry, I think women are like 90% of the fantasy readers on the planet at this point.
Oh, definitely. Especially you sprinkle in some smut, we are right there.
Well, that's what I mean. Like it's so common to see, like, you know, when you speak to like a woman, like, what's your favorite genre? Fantasy.
Especially recently, like we have done a great job. Yeah, all the female authors.
In the last like 4 or 5 years, like it has exploded.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, it kind of makes sense to like lean into that a little bit. And I think that, you know, perhaps if that is the case, then maybe the team behind the Lord of the Rings films were intelligent in their sort of like the way that they kind of like took things and adapted them to be like, hey, do you know what we could do with this a little bit is focus on a little bit more female empowerment to show women that, like, you know, hey, like we can actually like these stories as well and be interested in them and everything. And I think that, I mean, okay, so we're sitting here recording like a few days post Harrison Butker's speech at Benedictine College.
We have had the most diabolical lies told to us, apparently, ladies.
If you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up. I'm not going to talk about it, but it's nice to. I guess it's nice to be able to, in a world like this where there are opinions that are put out into the world in a very loud way for people to have no choice but to sit around and listen to. It is nice to have things like the escapism of these types of books and stories where we can see that, oh, look, like, you know, not only in the real world do we have to like push through and things like that, but there is possible success to be had for women and stuff like that. And I think that there's like in every field of study and work ever, there is a ton of female success. And I think that even as readers, look no further than the bestseller lists.
Of course.
Look
they're
for that.
All women writers. All of them.
All of these new ones that come out, the recommendations that you get via social media, the majority of the time, I don't know, 80% of them are written by women. And it's kind of at that point where it's sort of about time that at least in certain fields we start seeing more of that, because there was a time where that's it. The only best-selling authors out there were, you know, Stephen King and Dean Koontz and all of those, and and John Grisham, and like those are all fine.
Yeah.
And it's not like I'm a Stephen King fan. I love Stephen King's books.
Yeah, like we're not, you know, the whole point of, you know, looking at like equality and like gender parity is not to poo-poo one gender.
No.
It's to create equality.
I think that's the problem, is that I think a lot of people go into it with that. They're like, oh, so you're just shitting all over this other gender. And we're like, no, that's like,
no, I don't hate men. No. I'm just saying, like, equal opportunity, please. That's and I think just because we had a bit of a delay in, now we're in a space where there's a lot of women who are writing and like being published, and there has been for a very long time. Don't get me wrong,
but they're achieving so much mainstream success.
Yes,
because of the advent of people being able to put all of their recommendations out there incredibly easily in a 30-second video for people to go and watch if they're looking for an idea. Been a big help. Yeah, if they're looking for an idea for something, like, oh, okay, well, what are other people reading, kind of thing. And there's so much, and like, the advent of hashtags and all these things that you can search using really make it so that the sort of the whole world of novels and fiction is right at your fingertips, basically. And so any genre that you're searching for, you're able to pretty quickly find at least one or two that are going to be added to your bookshelf pretty shortly, and that you'll probably enjoy as well.
Why my TBR list is massive.
Yeah, well, and
then I pick up Twisted Love. I'm like, this is not on my TBR.
It is now.
It is now.
But it's on my currently reading. That's what happens with everything. I mean, I just had that with Between as well. I had come across it, never heard of it before, and decided that I would give it a read because it was on Kindle Unlimited. So why not?
I'm going to go check it out.
Yeah. Oh, hey, look at that. It blew away.
Continuity with the last episode. In case you were listening, the pizza box on my skylight.
I don't think it was a pizza box. I think it was like a roof shingle. Wow, that was a weird interruption.
Sorry about that.
Anyway, okay, wrapping it up. Wrapping it up. Whether it's characters or like that, you kind of find are recurring in more modern literature, or themes,
or villains,
oh god, the villains.
We didn't even talk about the villains.
That's true. Sorry, the villains are a pretty big one.
They
as
are
well, honestly, with the types of types of sort of like motives that they have for things. Well, it's like a fucking like a superhero villain, right? Like,
they always want to take over the world, right? Like, and it's like, can we have something a little different? Like, even in the Lord of the Rings, it's like, I want to make the whole world evil, and you're like,
but then there will be nothing to do.
I know, like, it's like, what are you gonna do?
I never understand that motivation. It always seems strange to me. I mean, it's always very strange to me in like vampire literature, when they're just like, oh, we want to kill everyone or turn everyone. I'm like, but then what will you eat?
What are you gonna eat? Like, you can't start eating each other. Like,
no. The only ones that I've seen have a really good idea for that are like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, because the Master in the first and like one of the seasons wants to create like a factory. Remember, there's the episode where it was like, oh, I wish Buffy had never come to Sunnydale. That whole thing.
Yes, this is what would have happened.
He's like creating like a food farm essentially, right. And I was like,
and that would make more sense.
That's smart.
Like, that would make more sense. But like,
but although eventually I'm still like, you're gonna run out of people in Sunnydale. Like, you're gonna have to send vampires to other towns to kidnap people.
Well, we were saying this when we were watching Twilight, because we do that. New Moon.
We're not the only ones.
When they bring in like the procession of like humans.
Yes, yeah.
And it's like, you would have to have like a super elaborate scheme set up where you were affiliated with a specific tour company.
Yes, it's true. Like, and like, the Volturi bring all those people in, like 25 people in, and then I guess kill them immediately.
Right.
And you're like, but how did you? There were like, children there. How did you explain that away?
They would have to be affiliated with even like the embassy and like the customs and stuff to be like, wipe all these people off your list. Like, they never came here.
And even so, how would you wipe the memories of the people back home who like family members and friends and colleagues?
I know.
And things who would be like, what happened to this person?
Everybody mysteriously goes to Italy and doesn't come back.
In
like,
this one area.
Nobody ever gonna like dig deeper on this. Like, it's been like fucking 3,000 years.
No, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. So, anyway. But it is something. But there's always something. It's always wanting to corrupt everybody, wanting to kill everybody, wanting to take over the world and run things the way that they want to, which I guess is a pretty overarching villain scheme.
I think it's a bit of a cop-out villain scheme. Like,
kind of,
when you get a villain with like the villains that have like a reasoning, that you kind of sit there and you're like, ooh, if I thought about that a lot, I might be able to get on side with that.
Yeah.
Those are the good villains. And then you're like, wow, am I a bad person?
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Like, you do have those. There are a few of them every once in a while, like, that they, part of what they're saying, you're like, oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, like, I understand your motivation, even if I don't agree with it necessarily, and I would not go about things in this way at all. I think you're right. I think that's always an interesting one to have kind of on tap sometimes, because you can just be like, oh, okay.
Yeah, but it's like, it's easier, like, especially in older stories, like Tolkien, like, you're gonna get your very simple villain who's like, I want to be evil and take over the world, because it makes it so much easier for, like, the good guys to, like, be like, well, we're good.
Yeah, and it makes it easier for you as the reader to be like, oh, we hate them, and we really like them. These other people who are trying to stop
They're really bad. Like, Mount Doom, big pit of fire, bad. Like,
don't love that.
Don't love that.
Don't like that big eye up there.
No.
That's not great.
I say that probably twice a week. Like, oh, the eye of Sauron is not on us right now. Like, people are like, hey, can you stop
People
with that?
Are like, wow, okay. It's fine. You shouldn't have to apologize for your likes and dislikes.
No.
With regards to your fandoms. Exactly. Basically I think all of this is just to say that really, like, the more, I think revisiting Tolkien later in life is an interesting thing to do, because as people who are reading, like, more modern stories that are being published regularly now, it's fascinating to go back to when these weren't so commonplace necessarily, and to see, like, origin ideas, like, where did this come from, who thought of this idea, like, what did we
where did we start with
this, what did it look like before, and you get
what else is out there in this world that we haven't yet seen, like, on our big screens, like the Silmarillion,
that's it. Because there's just, like, a very expansive universe that exists within Tolkien's work that would cover a ton of characters that have never been introduced on screen thus far. You'd be able to get into a whole bunch of the other stories.
Definitely.
It would be interesting. I wonder if they're ever going to do that with, like, Rings of Power. Like, if it continues, are they going to, like, introduce any of these other characters, or try, like, decide to do something with it?
Silmarillion was way before The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
like, he was, like, the OG bad guy, like, before Sauron.
Okay.
From my understanding.
Because, I mean,
I have it on my shelf. Have not read it.
Yeah. When is the Rings of Power set? Like, a few hundred years before the events of Lord of the Rings or something?
Yeah, because it's just before they get their Rings of Power.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so it was, like, a while before.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. People shat all over that show, and I don't think that its budget does it any favors, but I thought it was interesting and beautiful to watch. So.
Well, they are relaunching the remastered versions of The Lord of the Rings.
That's true. We do keep coming back to the things that we love as much as we like to think we don't. We definitely, we really
love
do
that nostalgia factor.
Oh boy. And studios do too, because I think it's, like, the one thing that they think they can make money off of now. So they're like, okay, well, we don't know what's going to happen with this original idea, so let's just stick with this instead.
Just make adaptations of all the things that we won't shut up about.
Yeah, you'd have to get around to that. I mean, if Amazon can make bazillion-dollar episodes of something like Rings of Power, you can probably nab another really big one and just do that with it as well, and that would be fine. That would be okay.
Be all happy.
And we'll see what keeps on happening, with, like, House of the Dragon and all of these things that were still, popular, we're still sticking with right now. As much as we all hated the end of Game of Thrones, we're all watching that show.
Well, we like the universe.
Exactly. We really loved a lot of what was created and established story-wise. So,
and, Targaryens are your perfect, like, gray area example. Like, you could peg them as the villains all the time.
They're very gray area.
Very gray area.
And there are so many different levels of gray within that family as well. Of, like,
weird family.
Like, almost completely black, and, like, oh, I'm somewhere in the middle. Oh, no, I'm almost completely, like, on the other side of things. Yeah, don't worry about it, kind of thing. Yeah. So, we'll see. We'll see how things develop over time. Anyway.
Stay tuned.
Yeah. But do you guys have any thoughts on Tolkien and sort of, like, pre-established, I guess, like, stories and characters and things like that, and how you think that plays into more modern fantasy that's being published now? I'm sure you do. You can let us know about that over on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads at FullyBookedCA, and you can also check out our Facebook group, which is at facebook.com/groups/bookwaswaybetter. But until next week, guys, and a whole new theme coming your way, keep on reading.
Thanks, everyone.